Welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Watkins, and I am so happy to be with you today. Whether you're a night owl or a morning bird, I'm happy that you're just here. So that's why I always start off by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I don't know when you all can be checking us out. So we're just excited to be with you today. We've got a great episode for you lined up. Before we go any further, though, to give a huge shout out to the folks that make this podcast possible, the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN, the leader in scientific research engagement. SPAN is your partner as you walk into the future. Hey, listen, I understand, just like anyone else, the world around us is changing. Innovations are coming out of thin air sometimes, and they are impacting our lives in the way that we do business in ways that we could have never imagined. But if you need your support, you need help navigating the waters of innovation, look no further than the folks at the Science Policy Action Network. Find more information about them at span-inc.org. That's span-inc.org. But we're super excited today because today's episode is made possible by Risen Home and Roof Repair. I'm a homeowner. I know all about the ins and outs of home ownership. Stuff happens. You have damage to your roof, especially with the weather that we've been having. And you need a trusted partner in this. Risen Home and Roof Repair. They deliver efficient, turnkey home improvement solutions that are backed by a team of skilled professionals. I mean, they are absolutely awesome. Their services include roofing, siding, decks, windows, gutter, painting, insulation, flooring, wood repair, and sheetrock. If you're a homeowner, you know about all those things. Listen, if you want more information about them, be sure to check them out at www.risenhomerepair.com. Check them out. Listen, they are absolutely awesome. And it's all about the culture that they bring with them. I had an opportunity to meet the owner. Absolutely amazing individual. And that's where we got the topic and idea for today's episode. Sat down and met with him and talked to him all about how he started his company, all about the values that his company has. And I'm going to tell you, he's an amazing person. But he was like, Richard, can we talk a little bit on your next episode about culture, tradition, and habit? And I said, absolutely. Absolutely. We can definitely talk about that because we are always interested in trying to figure out why people do what they do, how people come to the conclusions that they come to, why is society the way it is. And I felt that that topic of culture, tradition, and habit is just really, really important to really dive into. So let's just really dive into it. Let's just really have a conversation about what these things really mean. So when we say culture, right, we're really kind of talking about how cultural norms are passed down through generations because they're passed down through generations and are really nurtured into us, right? And when we talked about tradition, we can discuss how like these traditions serve as a selective, a collection of habits that shape all of our identities. We could also talk about how we cling true to these traditions, but not because necessarily you know, we, you know, we were raised with them, but because it's hardwired into us to really follow traditions, to fit in within the context of a broader society, a community, a village. It's really important. And obviously, habit. Habit is really important. The things that we do over and over and over and over again, right? These habits that we form. I mean, I've heard a lot of people they talk about starting really small, right? Building up the habits, making your bed every morning creates this habit of really taking care of the small things, right? You start that habit and then you're able to really take on the very big things in life. And so that's really kind of that habit piece. Let's really dive in. Let's talk about these definitions of what we're really talking about. So let's see, define culture. Let's see what it gives us here. Let's see what it gives us, right? Because I think we fail to realize just how important culture is. You hear folks talking about, oh, I don't want to get into these culture wars, and it's not important. Culture is incredibly important. And I think that the failure to realize how important culture is a failure to realize just how the world around you operates. So let's talk about culture just really quick, right? So culture is the shared system of beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that groups of people use to understand the world and pass it on to future generations. That's huge. And I have a kid. It's super important. I always try to instill within her these values that were passed down to me. I'm the third, Richard Watkins the third. So my father and his father passed down traditions which included the name, right? So I don't even have my own name. I have the name of my father, and my father has the name of his father. I mean, that is huge. I mean, even the tradition of passing on last names, right? You are your first name, but you represent your last name, right? These are huge cultural pieces, right? And again, a failure to really understand the importance of culture is a failure to just understand society and the world around you. It's very important to appreciate culture, very important. And no matter who you are, it's very important to really appreciate and respect it and understand your contributions to that culture, right? Now, culture shapes the way we think, the way we act, and the way we interact, often without us even realizing it, right? That's really important. We had an episode where we were just talking about the impact of peer pressure, the impact that the feelings and thoughts and opinions of others around us, how that impacts us and how it controls the way we see the world. That's really important. So culture impacts the way we behave, interact, the way we think, like I said, in ways that we don't even appreciate, right? So we could think to ourselves that the thoughts that we have are novel, but we're not really appreciating how the thoughts that we have had have been really passed down to us, right? Have really been given to us by the culture that we are in, right? And these things, right? Language, communication, right? The words that we use, the phrases that we have, the ways that we react to things, right? Our facial expressions, rituals, right? Rituals and traditions, whether it's marriage, holidays, right? The way we go about things, these are really important to culture, right? Really appreciating it. Norms and taboos. Now, what I mean by norms is, how you are expected to be, right? How you are expected to dress, right? I always wear the culture within the Science Policy Action Network is the black tie, And we got that going, right? But also taboos, how you shouldn't dress, how you shouldn't behave, right? Now, that is a cause for a lot of friction as societies evolve and change because society and culture and traditions, those things change all the time, right? The traditions that we have haven't always existed. right? And there's a friction that comes with that, right? And so culture dictates what is accepted and what is rejected, right? So taboos and norms, art, right? Music, storytelling. Storytelling is critical. Like, I love telling stories, right? Listen, I started this podcast for two reasons. One, I like to learn, and two, I like to talk. So that is really a part of it, right? And the way we talk and the way we tell stories, right? There are portions of our history that are lost to us, maybe forever, because the culture wasn't a culture in which stories were written. They were a culture in which stories were told. So there was an oral tradition of keeping track of history and what is going on. And because societies and cultures and communities change, whether it's due conquest or melding together or the adoption of new norms, oftentimes things are lost. But culture really impacts how we do things, right? And one of the other pieces that really culture dictates are like societal norms, right? Roles of society. What role do we expect this person to have? And what role do we expect that person to have, right? And also the expectations that we have of individuals, right? It's really, really important. Again, that last piece really kind of ties into a lot of what we were talking about in previous episodes, right? I'm going to really kind of talk about previous episodes a lot as we really start tackling these other huge issues, right? And we're talking about, the expectations, right? A lot of it is how we really approach authority, right? How we really approach learned people. So here's an example of expectations, right? If you come from a community that doesn't have a lot of doctors in it, you may find yourself, if you are of that community and become a doctor, you can maybe expect to get every question in the book asked to you. I know when I received my PhD in microbiology and immunology, I would go to the barber shop and folks were like, hey, take a look at this rash, because there's an expectation that you'll know everything. But I think that's one that I really hold near and dear to kind of be this source of understanding for different communities that I belong in. And I think that's just really, really important. And again, it's one of the big reasons that, I created this podcast. So I can learn more and more, and we can have these conversations about burning questions that you all might have, and we can really tackle these. And again, this episode is made possible by the kind folks at Risen Home and Roof Repair. Right, and so that's really what we're talking about as far as culture. But here's another piece, right? See what tradition is. Right. Let's see. Hold on one second. Right, no script here, right? This is all authentic, right on this. We're learning together. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of times we think we know what things are because we use these terms casually, and then we're like, oh, it's a little bit more complicated. We are all complicated, right? So let's just go ahead. All right, that next thing. All right, so we touched culture first. And now we're going to take on tradition. Let's see what we have for tradition, right? Now, traditions are customs, right? And practices or beliefs, right, that are passed down from one generation to the next, right? So your parents, they pass down to you different traditions, right? Say, for instance, there is a holiday that your family recognizes, and on that holiday, your family has a tradition of gathering at a single family member's, house for that holiday, right? That's a tradition that's really passed down. You didn't really have anything to do with that. You were just born into the family that you were born into, and there was an expectation that you will be as a member of that family in the place that your family and generations past has dictated to you that you'll be in on that holiday, right? So maybe it is your grandparents' house on Thanksgiving, right? There's an expectation that you'll be there. And that expectation was set before you were even born, right? So it's passed down from generations to generations, right? They can be rituals, right? They can be celebrations. We talked about holidays, or even small everyday behaviors that carry meaning over time, right? So I know I say my prayers, every single night. I say my grace before I eat. These are small things that just I do, but then I also pass them down to my daughter, and my daughter, does some of these things as well. And so that's kind of really what we're talking about as far as traditions, right? Now, what they do, these traditions, they're very critical. So you have people that really kind of, I think the word is balk, right? They push against tradition, right? Oftentimes because they weren't part of the generation that created those traditions, right? That's a really big thing, right? New generations are like, I had nothing to do with the creation of that tradition, right? So that's really what we really see. But the reason why traditions are important, the reasons why the traditions are important is because they preserve culture. They preserve culture. You do these things over and over again, and it preserves that culture, right? It preserves that culture, right? Previously, we were discussing how in some cultures, storytelling is an oral tradition, and very little of it is written. Now, if you have a tradition that every so often your community gathers together and a single storyteller tells the gathering a story, then that continues on and it preserves a particular culture. And when you remove that tradition, that aspect of that culture begins to fade away. That just happens. And so traditions are important to keep culture get kind of in place. It preserves it. Now, listen, some aspects of culture, many folks may say they need to be, phased out, right? And then that's when you kind of get into let's get rid of that particular tradition because we want that aspect of our culture to change, right? It just different strokes for different folks, depending on who you ask. It really, really changes, right? And traditions also. This is huge, 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 huge. You're gonna get there's a pattern. Like these things are huge because the things that we talk about on this show are absolutely huge, right? We don't we don't talk about trivial issues, not here on this show. If you want trivial issues, check out another podcast, okay? But right here we talk about huge things, right? But they create a sense of belonging. Traditions create a sense of belonging, right? If you're left out of a family gathering, or if you left out of a community gathering and you find out you're not invited, ooh, that feeling that you have, right? Being an outsider, right? Being on the outside looking in. Oh boy, it's huge. It's huge. It creates that feeling of belonging. Now, humans, we very social, right? Because we've been evolved to really depend on our community for protection and survival. And this is really, really important to us. And so we have these traditions to preserve culture, but also to create this sense of belonging. And you'll find out very quickly, especially if you ascribe to a particular tradition or practice, that if you're left out of that, you don't feel like you belong anymore. And so that's really, really important. Now, it's also important traditions mark major or important life events. Now, I just talked about this. I got ahead of myself, right? I put the cart in front of the horse a little bit, right? I put the punchline up front, like some people say. Like weddings, right? Like holidays, right? Like coming of age, right? So many cultures really eh, for children that reach a certain age, there's a tradition that represents that they are of a certain age. And that is really, really important, right? Now, these traditions may be, religious, which is also, part of the culture, right? Cultural, personal, right? You can start your own, right? Like a lot of times, like I said, when people push up against traditions, sometimes the traditions, again, that were established by generations before them, right? They were established before they were even born. Sometimes those traditions bump up against the personal values and personal traditions of the individual. And that's when you kind of have problems. And many individuals, either they stop participating in that tradition or they participate in that tradition at the detriment or the sacrifice of their own personal feelings, because that one piece, that belonging piece, is so important. I can't stress that enough, right? Not too long ago, I was having a conversation, and part of that, and I've heard other people say this. I've heard there was a motivational speaker, Simon Sinek. He said this, and I remember I was saying it before, that people, when they behave and when they act, they always feel like they are in the right. They always feel like they are in the right. Simon Sinek was, in this conversation. You all can look it up somewhere. He was talking about the movie Inglorious Bastards, and there is a character in Inglorious Bastards that represents the antagonist of the story. If folks watching know what I'm talking about, please put it in the comments. And you were saying he was going on, the circuit and promotion of the movie, or something like that. And they were asking him, how did you tap into the evil of your character? And the actor kind of responded, and he said, he's not evil. He doesn't think he's evil. And he started saying, like, that's something that we really have to appreciate about society. And that's the real thing that we have to appreciate about people, is that everyone believes that they are in the right. But that's not true. I don't think that that is true because of this. Because the intense desire to belong often has people go against what they personally value or what they personally believe to be right or wrong, just to fit in. That pressure is so intense where people will often do things antithetical to what they believe to be right. So, to push back against my own misconceptions, and my dear, I don't know him, Simon Sinek, who also said this. I don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's that simple. I do, based off of our last conversations about the experiment, about pressures where people knowingly they give the wrong answer just because everyone around them gives a certain answer, the people are very willing to do things that they don't believe in. They're very willing to do things that they know are wrong. This happens all the time. So I don't necessarily know if it's true that everyone believes that they're right in every behavior that they commit to. Sometimes people do things that they know are wrong for a wide variety of reasons, and one of those reasons could be, based on traditions, based on culture, based on a strong sense of wanting to belong. Yeah, that's a really big piece, and so I think it's, maybe a little too simplistic to say that everyone believes that they're right in everything that they do. In many cases, that may be true, but also in many cases, people do things that they know to be wrong, for a wide variety of reasons. And like I said, one of those reasons could be an expectation, could be tradition, and that real desire to be a part of something. And you look throughout history, and you talk to individuals who have participated in atrocities, and a lot of those individuals, they knew what they were doing was wrong, but they had to, for maybe threats to their own well-being, pressures to belong, to be a part of something. Um, it's really, really huge. And after the case, you talk to them, they're haunted by the things that they've done. There's a deep sense of regret. Um, and so I just think life is just complicated that way. Um, so yeah, that's really traditions. right? And what was the next piece? What else do we want? Habit? Yeah, let's talk about habit. What is habit? What do habit here? All right, let's do habit here. So we've done culture, we've done tradition, and the next one is habit. Again, this episode is made possible by the kind folks at Risen Home and Roof Repair. And so, habit, habit is a learned behavior as it becomes automatic. It becomes automatic through repetition. It's something we do regularly, sometimes without even thinking about it, because our brain has been rewired into a routine, and it can be positive, like taking a shower right in the morning, brushing your teeth, exercising. Some people develop habits of exercising, right? Maybe because they live in a community, a family that also has a habit of exercising. And so it becomes part of what they do. It could be negative, right? Such as procrastination, overeating, right? Or it could be neutral, like checking your phone first thing in the morning. Yeah, it just depends, right? Is that neutral? Is that negative? Is that positive? It just really depends. But those are all habits. Now, they form, right? When actions are repeated in a consistent environment. So that's another big part about habit, right? So oftentimes people want to break bad habits. One of the things that they often have to do is they have to change that environment. They have to oftentimes a lot of folks who are dealing with a bad habit, they have to change their environment. They have to change their social system a little bit if they want to necessarily break the habit. Sometimes, depending on the habit, the changes that you have to make are more drastic than others. And we're not going to go into that now. That could be a topic for another episode, but that's really what we're talking about is habits, right? And they become a part of how we operate day to day. They become part of how we operate day to day. Now, while culture and tradition are passed down, habits are usually built personally. Well, not all the time, right? But sometimes they're built personally. They can still be heavily influenced by people and the environment around us. All right. Do we have a full understanding of that? Habit, tradition, culture. We've got our arms around those three big issues. Well, if you do, put my hands together for you. But if you're still struggling to put your arms around it, welcome aboard. Because these are very complicated issues. And to the folks who have this covered, please, I wish that I had your level of understanding. The concepts of tradition, culture, and habit are super, super powerful. And it's hard to always really appreciate how they impact our lives, especially as we mentioned earlier, is the impact that it has on us. Sometimes we don't notice it. So tell me, if you're one of those people who understand this completely, how do you understand it if you are to admit that some aspects of its impact on you you're unaware of? Anyway, maybe you're aware of everything. I don't know. Maybe I should invite you on this show. So if you're one of those people, comment, you'll be one of my guests, right? Um, so that's really, really it. That's really, really it. But does habit, culture, and tradition define who we are completely? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe other things are at play. What brings us to the age old debate. Psychologists in the room know exactly where I'm going here, which brings us to the age old debate. What makes us who we are? Is it nature or is it nurture? Right? If you haven't heard about this debate, let me let you in on something. It's called nature or nurture, right? let's see. Let's see what we have here. Nature versus nurture. Okay. All right. So nature, we'll start with nature, right? Nature, it refers to the genetic and biological factors that shape who we are. Now, this includes inherited traits, right? Uh, Temperament, intelligence, physical characteristics, and even susceptibility to certain mental health conditions, right? Nature is, for lack of a better phrase, is what we were born with. It's the blueprint encoded in our DNA. Folks who don't know, DNA stands for three letters, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. If you're ever in trivia, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, right? It really has everything that we are, but we're still trying to really unravel exactly how DNA really plays into things, right? A lot of things that we have in our DNA don't even code for things that we recognize right now. And sorry, I've got something in my eye. I talk about nature. I don't really have a lot of eyelashes, right? Who knows? That might have been passed down, right? So nature is the part of us written, at birth, our instincts, our temperaments, the traits that run in our family line. Right? We don't always appreciate those things, right? But they are there. They are there. And the better we are at appreciating those things, the better we are at understanding who we are, the better we are at understanding why we do the things that we do, why we feel the way that we feel, and the things that we should be watching out for medically or otherwise. The next piece is nurture. That's a lot of what we have been talking about, right? It's nurture. Nurture refers to the environmental influences that shape our development, right? This includes our upbringing, our education, culture, life experiences, and the relationships that teach us how to move through the world. It's everything that happens after we're born. Now, nurture is the world's fingerprint on us, right? How we are raised, what we learn, who we meet, and what we go through. That's nurture. Now, but which one of those dictates who we are? Is it nature or is it nurture? Many people argue this all the time. Is it nature or is it nurture? Now, one of the big experiments that really shed light on this is the twin study. Has anybody heard of the twin study? Let's break this down a little bit. I always like to bring this to bear the people who are smarter than me, who have committed their lives to understanding these topics. All right, so let's do this. Describe the twin study. See what we have. And please, by all means, look any of this stuff up, check it out, uh, come to an understanding, on your own. Now, keep in mind, if you are checking out this podcast, if you're watching this, right, it's become part of the nurture aspect, right? You're learning, you're understanding new things, right? So the twin study or a window into nature versus nothing. So the twin study is a research method that compares identical twins and fraternal twins, right? For those that don't necessarily know the difference between identical twins and fraternal twins, identical twins arise when a single sperm fertilizes an egg that then splits, and those two fertilized eggs that then split, form two identical individuals that are 100% identical in regards to their genes because they come from one fertilized egg splitting. Just make sure I'm right on that one, right? I don't want to give you any misinformation. All right. I was absolutely right. So identical twins come from a single fertilized egg that splits into two embryos. That means they share 100% of their DNA. They're genetic copies of one another. But okay, I'm about to get too far ahead of myself. Right, let's describe fraternal twins. Right now, fraternal twins, from my understanding, are two fertilized eggs that are fertilized at the same time. Right? Let's see. Right. Exactly. So fraternal twins come from two separate eggs that are fertilized by two separate sperm cells. So identical twins, a single egg is fertilized and then splits and forms two identical embryos, whereas fraternal twins are two separate eggs that are fertilized by two separate sperm cells at the same time. So unlike identical twins, fraternal twins share about 50% of their DNA, like much like siblings, right? 50% of DNA is kind of identical. And we're just always still trying to really figure out different stuff, but that's pretty much what it is, right? And so it's just really interesting to really compare it. Now let's go back to how we really did it, right? Because it provides what folks say is a window into nature versus nurture. So the twin study is a research method that compares identical and fraternal twins to understand how much of who we are is shaped by genetics, nature, and how much is environment, which is our nurture. So again, identical twins, 100% genetics, share 100% of their genes, and fraternal twins share about 50%, just like regular siblings if you have any brothers or sisters, right? And it really, by studying how similar these twins are, especially identical twins raised apart, that's a key thing. Researchers can estimate the influence of genes versus the environment on traits like personality, intelligence, mental health, and behavior, right? Now, one of the landmark examples, it says the the Minnesota Twin Study, right, is one of the most famous studies, and it began in 1979 at the University of Minnesota. Researchers found identical twins who had been separated at birth and raised in different families, sometimes in completely different environments. Now, what they discovered was remarkable. They discovered that many remarkable similarities, even when the twins had never met, like similar job paths, hobbies, or even quirks like naming their dogs the exact same name. Okay. But also important were the differences that highlighted the role of upbringing to values and culture. One famous pair, known as the Jim twins, please check this out, Jim twins, were both named James, both married women named Linda, then divorced and I can't even believe this. All right, they both married women named Linda. Both divorced, and then they both remarried women named Betty. That's crazy, right? They both had dogs named Toy, and both worked in law enforcement, all before they ever met. Their story, it fascinated us. And it pushed the theory of nature versus nurture more mainstream, right? Now, also, this is also strange, right? There's also a controversial study. In 1960, a psychiatrist, Peter Nabor, and I hope I pronounced that right, ran a secret experiment where identical twins and triplets were deliberately separated at birth. There's a movie about that if you ever check it out, right? And placed in different homes. The families weren't told the children had siblings. The idea was to study the effects of different parenting styles and environment on genetically identical individuals. The study was never published. It was later exposed in a 2018 documentary, Three Identical Strangers. The results are still sealed until 2065. Ugh. And the ethics of the study remain hotly debated, right? So this was a situation in which the identical triplets were separate. I mean, I've seen the documentary. It's wild, right? It really makes you really start thinking, like, do I have an identical twin out there? I don't know. So yeah. So I thought that was just really, really amazing. But why do I say all of this stuff? Why did we talk about these studies? We talked about these studies, one, to really kind of show, experimental approaches and how people really try to tackle the issues of nature and nurture. But we also talked about them because it also pointed out the importance of both nature and nurture. Before I go any further, I want to say this one thing because they really talked about how it really talked about the nature aspect of it, but let's see about the nurture piece, right? And so we saw that even when these twins were raised apart, there were so many similarities that they still had, regardless of the different environments that they were raised in. Those things were hardwired into who they were. But there were other things, right? Identical twins that were raised in different environments still showed many similarities in the things like intelligence, but not everything. Their interests were different. Their political views were different. Oftentimes, your political views are impacted by where you live and the community you live in. Most of the times, people just don't just come up with their own political views. They're usually passed down as part of their culture, right? Values and social behaviors were often shaped by culture and the families that they grew up in. So that's another really big piece. Nurture also impacts how that nature is expressed, right? For example, a twin might have a genetic tendency towards anxiety, right? Whether that developed into a real issue depended on life experiences such as parenting, trauma support systems, etc. Right? Now, environment played a bigger role in things like religious beliefs, manners, and social norms, right? All these things that we covered already, language and communication styles, educational and career opportunities and coping skills, and emotional resilience. So different paths, but the same root. So even when twins had similar temperaments, how those traits played out in their lives depended on their upbringing. One twin might become a leader, while another might become more reserved, not because they were fundamentally different, but because they were taught different values and behaviors. Putting this all together, we are who we are because of the people that we are from, but we are also who we are because the people around us. We are both nature and nurture. We are both our parents, but we're also something entirely different from them. Everything that we are exposed to and allowed ourselves to be exposed to, it creates who we are. No one is able to create themselves in a vacuum. And if they were, and then if they did, they would be vastly different people from people not created in a vacuum. We are impacted by so many different things. Everything that we think about, everything that we do is a culmination. It's a summary. It's the product of everything that we've been through. It is the product of everything that went into forming us. We're parents. They inform who we are and what we do, but how those things are expressed, what we are expected to do, the opportunities that we have, now those are nurtured. So I have to give a huge shout out to the folks at Risen Home and Roof Repair, not only for making today's episode possible, but for asking us to discuss the very important topics of culture, tradition, and habit, because it allowed us to have a conversation about nature and nurture. And I know from my standpoint, somebody who truly values community, really values family, I really appreciate this topic being brought to bear. It's complicated. And anybody who tells you it's simple, you know, they must be a product of different sets of factors that come from both nature and nurture. And with that being said, it has been an honor to be your host today. I am Richard Watkins, and this has been another episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. And if you don't know anything, know this: the future is not something to wait for, it is something to build. Until next time, take care.